Every year they come from all over Vermont, from the smaller towns and the larger cities. Some of them farmers, some of them lawyers, doctors, store clerks, but all of them elected representatives of their local communities. And they meet in Montpelier to govern. Join me now as Adelphia Cable Communications takes us inside the State House. We're here in the Cedar Creek Room in the State House talking with Senator Mary Jess Skinner, the senator from Washington County, who's sitting the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and you've come up with a proposal which has gone from your committee over to Senate Appropriations Committee. Maybe you can give us an overview first, and then we'll talk in some detail about your proposal.
It's a pleasure to be here. The Senate Finance Committee completed work yesterday on a package of revenue measures that would raise slightly under $60 million in revenues, and we did that after working closely with the Senate Appropriations Committee to raise revenues for the budget that they're working on in the Appropriations Committee. Briefly stated, we started with some assumptions. One, we wanted to fund the pension plans for state teachers' retirement and for state employees, so we had to raise an additional $12 million to do that. In addition, we wanted to try and fully fund state aid to education, so we needed to raise $3 to $5 million to meet the needs for state aid to education. And in addition, we had the other elements in the appropriations bill that you've been reading about in the paper. The committee as a whole agreed that we needed to raise, that the centerpiece of our tax package should be the increase in the personal income tax by way of a surcharge. We agreed we should raise $42 million, and the dispute within our committee was whether that would be a flat 28% increase or whether it would be what we call a two-tiered approach. Ultimately, the committee decided to have a two-tiered approach with a 27% rate for the first $1,500 of taxable income and a 28.5% increase for any income beyond that. What that means in simple terms is that those persons with incomes between $40,000 and $45,000 will pay the higher rate, and those at the lower end will pay the lower rate.
The two-tier tax proposal is certainly more equitable. What is the next step? Obviously, it has to go through your Senate and then into a conference committee.
Well, I always approach these jobs one step at a time, and the first chore was to get the Finance Committee to agree on whether it should be a flat tax or whether it should be a two-tiered, and ultimately on a 4-3 vote we decided we wanted the two-tiered approach, and it's precisely because we thought it was more equitable. 28% increase in income taxes is a pretty sizable jump up. The governor has said it's a 12% increase in the income tax, and we felt it was the right tax, but we felt that those who earn less than $40,000 should be paying something less, and those who earn more than that could afford to pay something more. So for the average family that earns about $20,000, it means a savings of about $10 a year, and for the average $100,000 plus wage earner or income earner, it means paying $58 more a year. So when you boil it down, it's not a tremendous difference. It's really the principle of who is going to pay what share of the burden. And the committee feels comfortable taking that to the floor. I understand it will be a tight vote on the Senate floor if it passes. I believe there will be a conference committee because there is a lot of reluctance in the House to pass a tiered income tax. So all in all, when we get to the discussion of the tax package on the floor of the Senate, I think we'll have an interesting group of experts. When you have a Senate composed of 30 members and you're talking about raising taxes, and everyone becomes an expert. So it should be an interesting debate.
Over your several terms here, have you noticed a difference in the intensity of debate during election years, particularly in regard to discussing taxes?
Well, the last several years that I've been here, we haven't really had to raise taxes, and so there's been a certain amount of luxury to be able to discuss other issues and not worry about where the money's coming from. It's been a luxury of riches, and we've had surpluses which we've allocated for one-time expenditures, such as cleaning up Lake Champlain, paying cash instead of bonding for various capital projects, putting a substantial increased amount of money into state aid to education. So this is the first year in quite a long while we've had to debate taxes, and we've never really had to debate a tax package that's as large as the one we're debating in the next few days in the Senate. So the passion should run high. You should have a group of people that are reluctant to raise taxes, and you ought to be able to justify what you're doing. I think that's what the people expect. And our committee, I think, met its challenge, but we were reluctant to move into certain areas, such as the snack foods and some areas that we really didn't feel we knew enough about. We were reluctant to raise the beer tax because we thought it was aggressive. We felt that it would harm communities and stores that were on the border, and we want to keep our small businesses as competitive as we can, especially on the New Hampshire border and the Massachusetts border. So we looked at a lot of taxes, and it may not be the best package, but it's the best that we could do.
We've been talking in the Cedar Creek room here at the State House with Senator Mary Jo Skinner from Washington County.
How are you?
Good. You?
All right. I'd like to start out this afternoon by telling you some of our plans for Earth Day and encouraging Vermonters to join in the celebration of Earth Day on April 22nd. And it seems that we have a lot to celebrate. We have a chance to celebrate what we have accomplished in Vermont. And the most recent indicator of our accomplishment was the fact that we're designated as the #1 environmental state by a national organization. But obviously there's a lot to dedicate oneself to on Earth Day in terms of protecting the future of this planet. And as I looked at the list of activities, there's some 35 communities in the state planning a broad variety of Earth Day activities, and we're also going to have a ceremony on Lake Champlain, and we're going to have a hearing on global warming with the National Governors Association the day after Earth Day. But I thought it would be great if Vermonters could make a personal connection to Earth Day. So I will make the suggestion that church bells be rung at noon on Earth Day throughout the state. And if there isn't a church bell, you can ring a fire bell, or you can ring your own bell. But I think having this connection of bells, the symphony, if you will remind us of the importance of the earth, and also I think will stir some of the spiritual side of the whole environmental movement. It is, in that sense, more than simply changing one's lifestyle, more than simply changing laws, more than thinking of Mother Earth as our planet, but it is something within each one of us that has to be motivated and, in a sense, dedicated to protecting life on this planet. And I think there is some pause, as I've called it before, some backlash in terms of the slower economic times. But I would not over-dramatize that. I think Vermont still is far and away ahead of just about every other state. And when you look at the ambitious agenda we have laid out for ourselves, I don't see that we're slowing down. Every piece of legislation, of course, goes through processes of modification and compromise. And, for example, the Clean Air Act, our own version of the Clean Air Act, still, even though it has had some modifications in it, still is a very strong piece of legislation. Calls for a state overall energy plan, calls for a gas guzzler tax, calls for a 15%.
Here in the lobby of the State House, talking with Senator William Doyle, the chairman of the Senate Government Operations Committee. Senator Doyle, maybe you can tell us some of the things you're working on that are must bills in the waning hours of this year's legislature.
Well, obviously the PAY Act is very important. Lobby disclosure. We have several charter bills that the local towns like Bennington and Fairfax are looking for. Capital construction bill we have in the Senate Institutions Committee. These are all must bills.
The lobby bill, that really hit the press this week. There's quite a stir there in your committee, so a couple fellows got in a shouting match over that?
Yeah, that's called the Webster Wright debate.
The Webster Wright debate?
Yes.
Okay. What was the bone of contention in that debate?
Well, I think the bone of contention was revolved around, I think Senator Webster was concerned about legislators raising funds for political campaigns. And I think Speaker Wright said that any citizen has a right to go out and solicit contributions. Senator Webster went on to say, well, the Speaker's a very special person and not just an ordinary legislator, but that was sort of the confines of the debate.
This is a rather restrictive bill. Anything over $5, as I understand it, would have to be reportable, and reportable in detail in terms of what was spent, where it was spent, and so forth?
Very, very restrictive. The present law is very loose, and this would be a vast improvement over the present law.
How does Senator Doyle view this bill as it is?
Absolutely a must bill. Our committee is preparing about 7 or 8 amendments, but we think it's extremely important. We have some of the elements that we put in our Senate bill. The House has added some amendments, and we've added some more, but we think it's a good bill. Should pass.
We're coming down, as I said, adjournment. The scheduled adjournment is just 2 or 3 days away here. We'll probably go a week or two over the scheduled adjournment. But now you mentioned the Pay Act. What exactly is the purpose of that, and is there going to be any difficulty getting that out?
Every year we have a Pay Act, and this is it's a slimmed-down Pay Act, roughly a 3% compensation or 4% for state employees and for probate judges and state's attorneys and for all the officers of government. Much less percentage than in former years because of the fiscal difficulty this state is in.
You're going to be cutting some of the legislators' benefits, perhaps, in terms of meals. I know there was a proposal to cut that down to what other state workers get.
Yeah, I think Senator Webster may make that proposal in our committee.
The capital construction bill, a must bill.
Absolutely.
You see any rough sledding for that?
Well, there may be some differences between the House and the Senate. There always is, but I think they'll be reconciled in a committee of conference, and we'll see a capital construction bill. It's very important that the state have one.
Thank you, Senator Doyle.
Thank you, Bruce.
Pleasure talking with you.
Okay.
Well, if you follow the papers in the last few days, you know that Speaker Ralph Wright's lobbyist bill has made it to the Senate Government Operations Committee. It's flew through the House. He's ushered it through like it was greased. The only bill that he sponsored in the 6 years that he's been the Speaker. He ran into a little opposition in the Senate Government Operations Committee, but I'm here now in the lobby at the State House talking with a lobbyist, Bob Sherman. And Bob, maybe you can give us a perspective as a person who will be affected by this bill. Is there anything in the bill that's offensive, or is this something that's long overdue?
No, I think it's something that's needed. I think that it's appropriate that the legislature periodically look at the lobbyist disclosure law and the rules under which we operate in this building. I think most lobbyists will tell you that the legislature ought to develop the rules and does develop the rules and will live by them. I don't think you find a lobbyist in the building who's going to publicly oppose this bill. I think that it moved, I think you characterized it correctly, that it moved through the House so quickly because the Speaker introduced it, testified in the House General Committee, and promoted it on the floor, and it's now in the Senate where I believe, if it's changed significantly, probably will not become law.
There's a number of bills that have been sponsored in the past and ended up a lot of them dying in the House Government Operations Committee. Is there anything particularly different about this bill other than the fact that it may have been, its sponsor maybe have a little more notoriety?
No, I don't think that's why it would die if it does die. I think that there are some senators who have some serious differences of opinion about some of the issues in the bill, and I think that will probably, although I don't know, generate a conference committee. And a conference committee, lobbyist disclosure bill 2 years ago got to a conference committee and died there because it couldn't reach agreement. We seem to be moving in a parallel direction with this bill. We've got about maybe 2.5 weeks left to the legislative session, so it's going to be a tight schedule.
It's a little unfair question, perhaps, but what about lobbyists in general? Is it kind of an above-board, honest, self-policing organization here? Is there abuse? Is there really a need for a law like this?
Well, I think it's not an unfair question. I think it's a legitimate question. I think it's one the legislature asks all the time. I don't think generally there are abuses. I think what people have to understand is that we all constitutionally have a right to representation before our government, and that includes paid representation before our government. We have a system in the state of Vermont where we have a very powerful executive branch and a legislative branch that doesn't have equal power. They don't have access to staff. The Speaker of the House doesn't have any professional staff. What happens in a situation like that is that lawmakers depend heavily on two sources for their information. One being the administration, the executive branch, which is supposed to be separate but equal, and the second is lobbyists. And what individual legislators become, the good ones anyway, are professional sifters of information because they don't have anybody working just for them.
What about the idea that perhaps lobbyists would be intimidated by this speaker, that legislation they were favorable to wouldn't get consideration if they didn't produce certain favors in terms of fundraising and so forth?
Lobbyists and even lawmakers who are not sometimes intimidated by the speaker are liars. The speaker is a very powerful man in this building, and that isn't going to change whether or not you buy a ticket to a function or not. I mean, one of the ways of looking at that issue is that until we have campaign finance reform in the state, this is the way we finance our elections. I don't know that it's the best way that we finance elections, but I mean, political candidates spend, and I've worked on many political campaigns, an enormous amount of time raising money. This is a part of the job, and until we have campaign finance reform, that's not going to change.
You mentioned that the speaker is a powerful position. You've been here a number of years. Has this changed historically? Is the current speakership more powerful than the speaker's position has been in the past?
I think that the current speaker is more colorful, but I don't think necessarily that the power is all that different. I mean, I think that his power is more public and more open.
Talking with a couple of folks here to lobby the legislators, Jerry Greenfield from and also Linda Johnson, the Executive Director of Parents Anonymous, and you're affiliated with another organization. What is that?
It's the National Committee for the Prevention of Child Abuse.
Okay, you're here to lobby, I suppose, but also the governor signed a proclamation today, and what was that about?
She issued a proclamation that declared April to be Child Abuse Prevention Month here in Vermont, and that's what our organizations do, and we thought we'd come out and thank the governor and support the governor and let everybody know within the entire state that we're committed to eliminating child abuse in the state of Vermont.
Linda, how will a proclamation like this, how will it help your organization, other than the fact that it must be a tremendous psychological boost to you to get the backing of the governor?
Well, it is wonderful, the governor and the legislature as well. I think the boost really comes in acknowledging all the people and the hard work that goes into preventing and treating child abuse throughout the state, and the many courageous parents that come forward and seek help. And really for all of us as parents of all of us, in families, increasing our awareness and our commitment to having healthy families.
Sometimes the help is not that far away, but people have trouble just finding out where to get the help. Is there, I hope, an 800 number where parents around the state can call?
There is. We have a 1-800 number, and it's 1-800-544-5030.
Is that an answering machine, or is there someone there?
There's someone there until 5:30 every day, and then it's an answering machine till 8 in the morning.
And they'll get a call back. Jerry, I know this is just a part of an overall social consciousness for your organization.
Yeah, our company really believes that you need to be values-driven, that you shouldn't just have a company that's existing to make a profit. And child abuse prevention, for me, is a really personal matter. I think most people know that being a parent isn't easy, and you have your tough times out there, and you need help at times. And the future of the country, the future of the world really depends on kids having a good time growing up, or else they're going to turn into abusive parents themselves. If you start at the prevention level, you really create healthiness, and you talk about healthy families rather than how can we prevent this or prevent that, but you have from a very positive aspect.
Linda, maybe you can give the folks that are viewing that 800 number.
1-800-544-5030.
Well, thank you. It's nice to have you here, and I'm glad to see the governor recognizing your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
I'm here with the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator John Bloomer. Senator Bloomer is also the leading Republican in the Senate, and they have a proposal regarding appropriations. Maybe you could explain that to our viewers.
Yes, just briefly, Bruce. I'll do as best I can in a short period of time. We all realize here in Montpelier that these are kind of tough times financially. There isn't a great deal of extra money around, as is well known. The House of Representatives sent over an appropriation bill to us which called for $618 million for this 1991 fiscal year. That bill was immediately referred to Senate Appropriations, and that committee is going to bring out a bill today, hopefully today, which will be in about $620 million. This is in contrast to last year's appropriations of about $586 million. So you can see there's a considerable increase. At the Senate caucus today, a proposal was put forth by Senator Carroll, and the proposal is that at the appropriate time, a measure will be introduced in the Senate to limit spending for the 1991 fiscal year at $602 million. And once that meets with approval, the issue will then be sent back to the Senate Appropriations Committee, and it will be their job to fashion an appropriations bill that spends no more than $602 million. This is a little different approach. Rather than setting your taxes and raising the tax money and then saying, where can we spend it? Set it at $602 million and fill it in from there. This is obviously a lot less funds, a lot less money than has been proposed by the House of Representatives or the Senate Appropriations, but it isn't something that's just been dreamed up and put out there, because over the first few months of this year, there's a businessmen's roundtable that are made up of businessmen from Burlington and the Burlington area, and they have studied the state finances, and they have presented to the governor and to various committees here in the legislature a proposal which calls for spending in the 1991 fiscal year at $600 million, and they are convinced that government, state of Vermont government, can be run efficiently for that price tag. And so the Republican position is within that guideline, and we've come in at $602 million.
There's some criticism whenever there's an effort to just set what appears to be an arbitrary figure and then put the onus on someone else to determine where to make those cuts or where to raise the funds. Is that, in this case, an unjustified accusation?
Yeah, I think it is, because it isn't our job. It isn't the 30 senators in the Vermont Senate's job to write an appropriations bill on the Senate floor, because we're not experienced in that field. The Appropriations Committee, which is made up of 7 senators, listens to all requests, listens to people present, department heads, various people appear before them and present the needs for operating state government. So they are the ones that are familiar with the needs and have heard the testimony. All that the Senate Republicans are proposing, and what we hope the Senate approves, is that we indicate to the Senate Appropriations Committee the amount of money that is available for the operation of state government. And it is then their job, based upon all the evidence, the testimony they've heard, to allocate that $602 million. And it wouldn't be fair for 30 senators to sit in the Senate and try to rewrite an appropriation bill.
A question that almost demands to be answered, at least in my mind, is why Senator Carroll waited so long to come forward with the idea of this level funding of $602 million. This Senate Finance is done with their bill, Senate Appropriations done with their, a lot of work is already done, and now to tell them to go back and generate new figures using 602 as a guideline. There must be a reason, I'm sure there is.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of a hard concept to understand, except that during the process that the Appropriations Committee has been considering the appropriations bill, a number of suggestions have been made to the Appropriations Committee. And a number of inquiries have been made in certain areas, the state aid education area, in various areas as to what the final figure would be. And really, up until even today, the Appropriations Committee has not been willing or has not been able to give specific figures in specific areas. So that being the case, we weren't sure really where the figure was going to eventually end. We have been convinced that it's going to now be in excess of the House proposal at 618, and so, something had to be done. This was the time that we thought it was right to do it. Arguments can be made it should have been done earlier, but really, now is the time that the appropriation is going to be set for next year. The last couple of weeks have been kind of preliminary scuffles and preliminary debates. Now is the time that it should be done, and that's why we're doing it at this time.
Another question that's critical importance, I suppose. Can you get 16 votes for it?
I don't know. I really don't know that. I do know, or I think we know, that the people of this state are very concerned about the growth of government, the size of expenditures, and it appears to us that this is not a year to have a great percentage increase in your spending level, when in fact, in order to do that, it means to raise taxes. I think my figures are correct, that the bill as it came over at 618 million to 620 million was a 17% increase in spending from last year. I think I'm correct on that. And that just can't be tolerated in times such as this when tax revenues and so forth are decreasing.
Senator Carroll's proposal, there was some near unanimity in the Republican caucus?
There was no official vote taken. It was generally discussed. We were cutting toward the end of the caucus. People had committee meetings to attend at 1:30, so there was no official vote taken, but there was no strenuous objection thereto. There were a couple of comments, but as far as it was my impression anyway that a majority of the people there looked favorably upon the proposal of Senator Carroll.
What else are you working on, Senator Bloomer, that's must-do legislation between now and adjournment, which scheduled adjournment is just 2 days away?
Yeah, we're never going to adjourn 2 days from now. However, it's imperative that we adjourn next Friday or next Saturday. And if the legislature goes beyond that date, I don't think there's very much excuse for so doing. When legislature reconvenes next January, depending upon who's in Senate Judiciary, if I happen to be here, I will make it the number one priority of this committee to start on a family court proposal first part of January 1991, and also the second priority in January of 1991 will be the drafting of a proposed amendment to the Constitution, Vermont Constitution, dealing with the bail situation. Those are two areas that must be addressed. I think it would be a mistake to try and address the family court issue in the remaining days of the legislature, and I wouldn't be convinced that this would be a valid or a proper method of procedure.
Hello, I'm Bruce Nelson. I'm with Adelphia Cable. I'd like to ask you a couple questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
I understand that if someone wants to speak with their legislator, that they can call here, the senators or the representatives, and give you a message, and you'll get them to the legislator. Is that right?
That's right.
How can you possibly do that? There's 180 legislators and all people all around the state calling. How can you possibly accomplish that?
Well, it's true, and it's very busy, and it's hard to do, especially if they call and say from Chittenden County and they want it to all of Chittenden County senators. That means you've got 6 messages to write on one phone call, and it does take a lot of time. We sit here at the desks all day answering the phones and writing up the messages. Then the pages will take them to either the House or Senate chamber or committee rooms, wherever they happen to be meeting, and deliver them to the people.
Well, maybe I ought to talk with one of these pages then.
Sure.
Elizabeth, some calls have just come in. The secretaries there in the Sergeant of Arms office have written them. I'm giving them to you. Now, what are you going to do with these messages?
I will take them up to the House Representatives, and I'll give them to the doorkeeper, and he will distribute them to the pages who work in the House.
I see. So you're not going to deliver them yourself, are you? You've got a little relay system here.
Yes.
Thank you, Elizabeth.